So thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, particularly discussing this very interesting and exciting topic. Maybe a little bit of background to set the scene. I'm a partner at Sofinnova, and we've relatively recently launched a strategy dedicated to the digital medicine space. Now, I'll explain what we mean by that, because this is exactly what our panelists will be talking about. This intersection that we have between medical devices on the one hand, which have been traditionally single-use or single application, versus these new data-driven approaches and models that we're seeing, leveraging AI and these tools and technologies. So when we think about this space, it's actually something that is totally new, totally revolutionary, because it enables us to generate so many more insights and actionability that in the past was not actually possible. So we move away from just a hardware function, now suddenly to the software piece and that intermingling of the two. It opens us up to being able to actually push towards repeat customers, repeat business models, opening up to novel people who are actually willing to not only acquire the insights and the data, but also see how they can leverage that for the development of new tools and technologies going forwards. So this panel that we've assembled shares the vision, but also has gone through pieces of that puzzle, all the way from the very early stages of development, in certain cases still in that process, all the way through to actual commercialization and achieving the hurdles that we sit there. So maybe if I can hand it over to you, gentlemen, to introduce yourself. Hamid, would you like to go first?
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. My name is Hamid. I'm the founder and CEO of NovaResp. We focus on obstructive sleep apnea. If anybody in the audience knows about sleep apnea or CPAP machines in their family or friends, usually when someone is prescribed with a CPAP, they don't like using it. We solve that problem with AI. We predict and prevent apneas before they would happen, so the pressure of therapy lowers. I'm sure you've blown up a party balloon before. In the very beginning, it's hard to push, then it gets easier. Same with the airway. It gets easier if you know an apnea is coming. You can keep the airway open at lower pressures, make the machines more comfortable. We're a purely software company that could turn into a hardware company. So a great discussion today.
Brilliant. Michael?
Yeah, thanks so much as well for the opportunity here. I'm Michael Ebner, co-founder and CEO of Hypervision Surgical. We are a health tech company based in London, and our goal is to provide the surgeon a superhuman level of vision to help them see critical structures with much better clarity and give them certainty in making judgment calls on what to cut and what to spare and where to join tissue. So the way we do it is what is a fancy technology called hyperspectral imaging. Basically, it just means like many more color bands than the human eye can see, and use this effectively to characterize tissue and visualize it in a very intuitive way back, so that it really is like video stream and instantly gives decision-making insights. And the component of data is really important, because for the first time we will have many more color bands, so tens of color bands rather than just 3 at our fingertips doing surgery that we can use to extract insights and inform. And that really is an entirely fascinating prospect as we think. So to highlight there as well, so we are, I guess, on this journey. We are at a pre-commercial stage, so very much on this conversation is what we're trying to figure out, and very happy as well to share the insights to the point we have been learning them thus far.
So a lot to discover still on that path.
Exactly.
Gabriel.
Thanks, Simon. Gabe Jones, co-founder, CEO of Proprio. Proprio is a Series B surgical navigation company out of Seattle. So we're doing real-time 3D volumetric navigation for things like spine and cranial surgery. This is an FDA-cleared platform for spine surgery. And the first applications are unique in that we can actually track individual vertebral bodies, for example, live in 3D through what's called light field rendering. And we're the pioneers of real-time light field rendering. What this effectively allows you to do is use machine learning to segment out the entire anatomy and then track it in 3D like CAD models live. And this gives the surgeon the ability to go from what current navigation is, which is essentially an X-ray stapled to the body, right? You're all familiar with reference frames and arcs and these fiducials that really dominate surgical navigation today and limit its adoption to maybe 20 and 25% in a space like spine. So we see this as a huge opportunity. Real-time 3D volumetric information, data, gives us opportunities to give clinicians really these advantages to perform better, faster, and safer. And then on the back end, as we'll talk some more as we go through this really exciting conversation, I think the most interesting panel at the entire LSI Barcelona, a little biased on that topic, But literally, I think all of us have the same belief that the future most successful medical device companies absolutely must be data intelligence companies on the back end. And we can discuss that a little further.
Excellent. Claude.
Claude Cohen-Bacrie, thank you, Simon. Claude Cohen-Bacrie, founder and CEO of e-Scopics. e-Scopics is a point-of-care ultrasound company. We've created a new way to democratize ultrasound, transforming ultrasound into a pure software. So the hardware component of our product is simply a transducer, and this transducer plugged onto a PC where we have a software, and this software is an app. And we are developing a specific app for every specific clinical indication. The goal is to go outside radiology, upstream from radiology, but also downstream. We are working in intervention. We are a software platform that provides ultrasound. And I think the key to democratize ultrasound is to remove the burden of image interpretation. And the way we do that is by providing imaging, quantitative imaging biomarkers. And I think that this is exactly what this discussion is about. I mean, going from a simple image to an information which can take the form of a biomarker using data. This biomarker can be an image, but it can also be a completely abstract interpretation of this data, which we find in the AI-based algorithms that we develop. So we target specialty clinicians and primary care on one hand, interventionists on the other hand, to spread ultrasound with this new technology.
Excellent. So we all know medical devices, the way we've approached them for decades. Now suddenly we have this new piece that's suddenly generating data. Gentlemen, I guess my first question is that it? Is just having the data suddenly enough and that's the value itself, or is there more? How should we think about this?
You want me to take that softball to start?
Go for it.
Yeah, so we were talking about beforehand. I think a useful way for maybe the audience to think about this as we do is think about it like three pillars. So data is very useful already in clinical settings. I think we all have applications of that that we've either proven or are proving out right now, depending on the stage of the company. So use data to prove something clinically to help a clinician to solve a problem, whether it's diagnostic or therapeutic. If you think about that as the first pillar, that's sort of table stakes to even be in the conversation. That's how we think about it. Second would be, can you then leverage the data to either accelerate that clinical treatment, make it better, faster, safer, perhaps, possibly even cheaper, or to look across the value chain and then leverage the data to maybe make money or add value to someone else. This would be thinking about implant companies in our case or other application providers who can connect to your platform. I'm very jealous that your demo fits in your pocket and you can connect to someone else's transducer. In our case, it's a surgical navigation platform. And then we collect over 250 gig of data, which is video, navigation, imaging, pre-op, post-op, what implants were utilized, and all of those data become this rich data set that then column 3 you can start to explore. Other ways to monetize for other customers, other than the hospital. I think that's where sort of the framework can be applied going forward.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I guess one of the core kind of components of that is it's not just about generating the data sets, but it's a lot about the actionability, the what can we now do with in an application setting. So when we think about that then, what are some of the core criteria that each of you have thought about, have gone through in terms of your assessment process of, okay, great, we have our first application, but then we potentially have a second, a third, a fourth, building these services, quite frankly, that can be leveraged on top of your first initial product core. How have you kind of gone about that thinking? Michael?
Very happy to. So, of course, like everything what we do needs to address a real clinical or patient need. And of course, as well, that needs to be married up with product market fit, what the technology is capable of doing in like short-term, mid-term, long-term, and then, of course, trying to now stage this accordingly. In our particular context, what we are having really is the ability to capture information, so a video stream of hyperspectral that is entirely untapped and new. So, but we need to demonstrate value of this in the first place. So the way we went about it is like, okay, well, let's actually use this data to provide a first product that can also replicate color vision as a conventional one, so to basically be comparable, but also provide a first information that is really invisible to the human eye, that is tissue perfusion, and using this with the same like algorithm, baseline of technology, and really establishing that from the clinically, as you've pointed out, and establishing these use cases for colorectal surgery in particular. But then the question is, right, If you have shown this now for this indication, the holy grail, of course, is tissue differentiation, like for nerves, for uroducts, tumor. But to get there, it's a long journey in terms of fundraising, in terms of regulatory. So what we are trying to do is also, how can we always stage from one part to the next, where we can also, with essentially kind of value chain. We are not interested in developing our own independent vision system commercially. It's just way to complement it. As a startup, it's almost bound to fail.
I know exactly how you feel.
So we're trying, like in conversations, how can we slot into existing vision systems and provide true complementarity? This needs to be step by step evaluated and established. So, and from there, we can always gather more data and drive decisions from there.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So when we're thinking about it the way that Gabe kind of set out the 3 pillars there, it's not only building out across the pillars, but it's also within the verticals of each of those pillars. You can keep going and keep growing, in fact.
Yeah. And very much in a temporal nature, because everything like needs to be staggered and predicted to the extent possible in a very unpredictable environment at some level.
Claude, how are you doing this?
Well, I think I'm very pragmatic in general. So I think that data contains a lot of hope. But at the end of the day, we are here to sell products. And the way we viewed that was that we can do conventional ultrasound imaging with this data, which is something that everybody knows. We can also extract existing quantitative imaging modalities, like measuring stiffness of tissue or measuring physical parameters. We don't invent anything here, and it's done with the same exact data. And this is something that can be sold. This is a very concrete, almost conventional medical product. However, every time we do an exam, the raw data are stored in the cloud. So indeed, after that, we'll be able to extract non-physical parameters, but features, I would say, that you cannot give any meaning about except what you intend to diagnose. So for example, today we are in the NASH space in liver imaging. We collect stiffness associated to fibrosis, attenuation associated to steatosis, but we still miss inflammation. With all this data, plugging on all the clinical trials that pharma is doing, we'll be able to retrospectively analyze this data and see whether there's anything, I cannot define this thing, that is related to inflammation. And I think this is the power of data, but we don't sell that hope. We sell what already exists. We've cleared the product, we've CE-marked the product, and with this product, we'll be able to generate the data that will then enhance this product with future biomarkers. So I think we have to go step by step, not promise the moon, but install and sell the rocket that will bring us to the moon.
And I guess each of these iterations, it almost goes faster and faster because you have so much retrospective data that you can then look back at and retrain models as and when you go and increase that. I'm really curious because you're sitting implanted on the CPAP machine.
Yeah.
What's the relationship like with the actual hardware vendors as well? Because I mean that's critical in terms of your deployment, commercialization, the business model that you mentioned.
Great question, and I can relate to the co-panelists here. So for us, it was a unique situation. As you said, you need to figure out what is the market need. You need to figure out what are the regulatory steps towards having this line of products set up. And also, I think money efficiency also comes into this. So for us, it was, we have a software that could go on CPAP machines and turn it from, old-fashioned machines into intelligent machines. But how intelligent? We had to think about the regulatory pathway. If I enable personalization of therapy and learning from patients night after night, of course, that's the future. If I enable it now, all of a sudden, this software doesn't have a 510K path, and it has to go through a more gruesome regulatory pathway, which also needs more cash to run. So it was a matter of what does the market care about? For us, it was patient adherence. We realized that increasing patient adherence, just patients using their CPAPs more than 4 hours a night in the beginning of being given a CPAP, enables Medicare to cover the cost of that machine and the consumables that come up. If we increase that adherence by 10%, that's equivalent to $700 million a year, more revenue for the manufacturers. So we decided to shrink the AI model size that would fit in the current chips that are on CPAPs.
Okay.
Enable that. That's a huge incentive for manufacturers. And for DMEs that give out the CPAPs, they spend quite a bit of money trying to convince the patients to keep the CPAPs. And most importantly, to improve quality of life immediately for patients, and then line up the rest of the personalization and other SaaS models that could be built off of that.
Interesting. So it's a win-win situation you're trying to find here with both the manufacturer and the healthcare provider, the healthcare payer. So
I'd put another win there, win-win-win, manufacturer, DME, and patient.
very good, very good. Gabe, maybe going to you. Let's maybe go directly into the actual true subject matter here. We're talking business model and business model innovation. Tell me, how are you, in your approach right now, valorizing, let's say, your data generation in the immediate, so right now in terms of actually changing or impacting clinical care, but then in the second phase of thinking about how can you do product iteration, other services on top of that?
Yeah, so we've got a friend from Intuitive right here in the front here. So I was thinking about different applications of the data, such as the amount of data you guys are collecting. You're able to go back and look at clinical performance, efficiency, how the surgeons are utilizing it. Intuitive's got a great application for surgeons. I think that's great. Tell me if I'm wrong here, if you figured out how to monetize that. But maybe it makes the product much more sticky and drives a lot of engagement. I think that's kind of layer one, right? Can we plug data back in that makes it more engaging for whoever the customer or the user is, not always the same person? Then I think applications clinically that give us kind of unfair advantage, competitive advantages against whoever's the players in the space right now. An example for us would be thinking about Medtronic or Stryker or one of these players in spine and orthopedics. The dominant paradigm in navigation is to put little markers on things so you can track it in 3D space with infrared cameras, if you're familiar. So that's what everyone is going to do. So unfair technology advantage based on the data is, well, we can build up 3D models of everything in the space and track it independently. Okay, all of a sudden you now enter a world where you can add value to someone else's implant that is otherwise, no offense, not smart. We won't say dumb, but not smart. It's not enabled in some way. You're effectively digitizing that product, building up a CAD model, then tracking it live in 3D. And through the performance of a surgery, you're able to say, hey, I can make your product measurably and demonstrably more effective. Because coming out of that with a navigation system and visualization, you get a data set that says this product performed better than that one. Now I've given you marketing materials and data to go sell your product better, and that gives you incentive to be on my platform. So you should probably pay me for that. Kind of an app store model, but thinking about both hardware and software as app. This is essentially chasing the pain in the workflow, pain for the surgeon, and the piles of money. And then back to that third kind of column of our framework there. What did we just observe in that incident, in that intervention? Well, we saw a preoperative imaging, a pathology, a diagnosis, an intervention surgically. We saw the implants and the techniques and the approaches and the navigation, the angles, everything that were used to tackle that and to treat it. Otherwise known as a longitudinal data set of a surgery. So that's valuable to any third-party player who would want to come in and understand what was used to achieve what and what should be paid for. So now you have inventory information, you have billables, coding, operative notes, everything kind of embedded in a singular data set that's valuable to anyone in the value chain. So we're 2 of the 3 steps through that process now. Monetizing the third column to RCM companies and insurers, I think, are next.
So that's the next stage of it all. Claude, how have you been kind of thinking about this?
We've observed the same kind of move. The software platform that we created for ultrasound imaging is also licensed to third-party manufacturers. I mean, that can be licensed to a company that does indeed image-guided robotics. But we license it to a company in the US that is commercializing medical devices for intervention. Pure hardware, you pay by the device kind of business model. And their goal is really to become a data company, specifically to create more growth and to basically have their customer, create a differentiation compared to their competitors. And they thought that the imaging data that we could provide could add what you exactly described, which is what do we learn when we do the intervention from this imaging device that could help us not only do a better job, and our customer will buy our device instead of others because we have this accessory that helps us do a better job, but also what we learn during the intervention, observing what we do, can actually help us go closer to the patient upstream. we would learn from an intervention, let's say, on the properties of a vascular wall, then we could commercialize and distribute early on a device that can characterize this vascular wall early enough so that the customers, the patient, are oriented towards our medtech medical device sooner. So I think it is both a way to differentiate yourself when you're a conventional medtech company to move into the data space. It's also a way to create more value. But I think at the end of the day, this is going to become a true barrier to entry for competition. We've talked a lot about all these AI models that are based on a data set. Let's say I plug onto a big clinics that has a huge data set and I create an AI model. What is my barrier to entry? It is the data set. If now you create a device or you sell the device that help you create this data set, you've increased the barrier to entry for competition, I think.
Very interesting. So maybe taking a bit of a different swing here, there's another piece of the puzzle that we haven't actually addressed yet, which I find super interesting. It's all four of you built fundamental platforms, if I should liken it to anything. There's, of course, the direct monetization, direct business models that you can build off of that. But then there's also thinking about the wider ecosystem play here. Because, let's say, classical medical devices, they were relatively vertical. It was take medical device, sell to hospital, implant in patient, job's done. Here, though, you're creating insights and actionability on your own approaches. But is there an interaction to be had maybe with the rest of the ecosystem? I'm thinking, for example, with other surgical applications or with novel AI approaches now being developed for sleep, if it's in OSA, if it's in CPAP, if it's in other modulations and things. How are you thinking about that? And is it part of the strategy now, or is this more of a next phase of this entire data-driven business model iteration, do you think?
So it's something obviously that is very much in my mind because these questions are really important. I mean, also to think about it perhaps more holistically. I mean, it's always fantastic, like ideal to think about data within medicine, surgery, and how do we get business models from there. But it's also we're looking into just for where I've recently seen it and where it's a bit more established, say for reimbursement of AI-based technology in radiology. I mean, 200 products are being cleared at this point, and only 6 thus far have their own reimbursement code. Of course, this has all like knock-on effects what this means for potential business models per se. We know that there is a lot more towards digital surgery in robotics, trying to have an ecosystem where all these technologies can interact with each other, but still the stakeholder fitting and how it can be priced and those particular kind of like streams and how these individual stakeholders can work with each other is very, very difficult to get right in practice. And I think we're just scratching the surface on that. So for a startup to actually work on that and try to figure it out is a hell of a journey. So for us, what we are trying to do now is really kind of like thus fine advanced visualization still has been very much on something that is subjective in one way or another. Surgeon make decision A, and then afterwards kind of like looking, okay, well, was this the right decision? In our case, we provide we capture and we can analyze an objective data stream on how tissue looks in the spectral domain. We can literally say, at the time of incision, here there is now the level of perfusion at that point of incision. That should very much help as well to around the perioperative periods that we are able to have preoperative imaging, see it through the surgical procedure and afterwards postoperative outcomes, and being able to connect this with intraoperative data. So it's a very new way of seeing it, and that's very appealing, of course, in the ecosystem of seeing robotics, where there's many more ways of capturing data. So again, for us, is to figure out how do we fit in there, right? We don't want to have now a new imaging system that is part of that, as in like a separate one, because it can't be. It needs to be tied into this value chain. So what we're trying to do is, again, like understanding complementarity. And in our case, we do think it's a lot about augmentation. And then the question is, how can this be built separately? And we are, and I'm actually very keen as well, also a question for the audience, like experiences people have had, and I'm very, very happy as well to have conversations afterwards to exchange notes, I guess, in one way or another. But it is like, to my, it's like if it was straightforward, companies would have done it. So we are essentially in a pre-digital environment, and have a lot of opportunities that we see outside of medicine coming into medicine. So how do we do that? I'm not sure whether I answered the question.
So if my takeaway is, it's fair to say that one, we're still at the cusp of beginning to enable this fully. You guys are at the kind of forefront of this, in fact, with two companies here.
You just teed up a really good thought, though. How can we look at other adjacent industries? Maybe I'm just biased because I live in Seattle and I have not only Starbucks, I apologize for the bad coffee that we have projected on the world, but we also have Microsoft and Amazon, and increasingly Apple and Google Cloud. It's really the cloud capital of the world. So we have the flywheel business models kind of all around us, right? Whether it's Microsoft's flywheel or Amazon's. So we understand how the cloud and Amazon Prime and the marketplace can all work together to drive more efficiency and frankly, value for the consumer of those services. I don't know if you guys all use Amazon, but we're fully addicted to Amazon Prime. Everything is a 2-hour delivery in Seattle, and it changes your behaviors. And so think about that in the context of medicine and healthcare. Again, back to the kind of the pillars. We must be clinically relevant. We must impact the clinical decisions and make things better, faster, safer. That's table stakes. I think that gives you an opportunity to be there in the OR, as you were alluding to. What can you do to add something to that? So now you collect data. In our case, we'd say a case like, or a condition like scoliosis is currently unaddressable. And how do we know it's unaddressable? Because the literature tells us only 35% of the time is the care team able to achieve their goals in terms of correcting the anatomy, the spine, into a healthy state. It's very measurable, within 5 degrees in 3D space. Why are they unable to do that? Because they don't have real-time 3D information. So we're solving that on the front end. Think of that as the mini gear that you add to navigation, in our case, to accelerate that flywheel a little bit. Flywheels need to be built intentionally, so the third piece is data and access to data to third parties. This is implant companies. We're adding digitization to an otherwise maybe not smart product. And then the third piece that accelerates the whole thing is providing external third-party access to the insights that come out from that. So whether that's RCM, billing, coding, all those kind of applications I was discussing before, the belief is that will accelerate even the clinical product development, right? So the flywheel then drives reinforcement learning from a technical standpoint back into the clinical front end, and the whole thing moves a lot faster.
And I guess you can even start pushing this into education. So even when physicians are still being trained up, suddenly they're familiar with this, they're getting the best insights generated for them. They come into the hospital segment, they already know your product solutions, and suddenly, bang, it's a much better adoption, I guess.
Unfortunately, that's not a great business model, right? If you just had a clinical education product or company, it's hard to monetize. We've learned that. So you have to kind of fit it into your own ecosystem while making money for the other players in the system.
Very good point.
I like your point on education, because that's what data can be used for too. When, of course, we educate our customers to perform an ultrasound, it's a very targeted exam. The first customers we have are diabetologists, hepatologists. We teach them where to position the probe between the ribs. There's no issue about that, and where to position the region of interest to do their measurements. But we've also developed a software that runs on the data that are stored in the cloud for our pharma clients that are performing clinical trials, looking for patients. And they want to have a visibility on how the exam is done to control the quality of what is done. So we've developed, based on this data, algorithms to automatically segment the liver and basically create tools that are going to be used for customers to do a better job and for us to do a better education and ultimately a completely digitized education, thanks to the leverage of this data that we have stored. So I think it's data. Of course, data is useful when you have a huge volume of data too. I think we've not spoken about that, but this is the key: good data, triage data, and a volume of data. So to get a lot of data, you have to get a lot of procedures if you are in intervention, or you have to democratize its use very upstream in the chain if you are in the diagnosis or screening arena. And going back to the business model, we've chosen a subscription-based business model now for this ultrasound system, where you subscribe to the service, and you have, the probe is just shipped via regular mail. You download the soft, and you can generate your data. So I think business model has to evolve also with this type of new type of business. Subscription or pay-per-use. because we also trigger, we have specific billing codes that exist, and we don't invent anything, is a key to generate this volume of data.
Very cool.
I can add to this. Again, data, a lot of data for AI is important. So for us, we could have focused on non-invasive ventilators for COPD patients at home. We could have focused on ICU ventilators, anesthesia machines. Funny thing is, a lot of the angel investors originally invested in NovaResp were actually physicians, because it wasn't a surprise to them that we could predict a respiratory failure and prevent it, because they see it with their eyes on the monitor and they can't do anything about it until the next bad sign shows up. And that's what machine learning AI is. You see something with your own eyes, it repeats, then you collect thousands of samples of that, and you develop AI models with that. So we had to focus, as an early stage company, we focused on sleep and decided to just collect that data.
Interesting. So if I'm kind of summarizing this, and I realize we've only got about 7 minutes left, the actionability component of all of this is the critical piece, in fact. It's getting that initial actionability of the data that you've generated to then have an impact somewhere in some stage of the healthcare cycle or even product development and such. To the next point, though, that flywheel, getting that flywheel going. I'm curious to understand, where do you see the biggest hurdles right now? Because we've got this title, and it's future or pipe dream for data-driven business models. I'm a firm believer that this is happening already now, so I'd say it's pretty much the present will become something standard in the future. But what do you think the biggest hurdles are for that to actually be true, let's say, across the entire industry?
I can start with one we're dealing with. Our customers, our primary customer, doesn't really know the value of the data that we are collecting or that they already have. So a hospital system, we're dealing with one right now, I won't mention, a very, very large one, has been collecting physical forms on surgeries for the last 7 years or so. Actually going to surgeons and asking them to check boxes to say, you know, what did you do?
So
and
huge filing cabinets of paper.
literally. So 400,000 surgeries, spinal fusions, and this, you can narrow down which hospital system I'm talking about. It's one of two of the largest. But they've been asking surgeons to fill this out. Yet another documentation step, whether it's EMR, EHR, coding, et cetera, that we're now leaning on the clinicians even further, who spend 80-85% of their time not doing clinical interventions to help patients because we ask them to do so much paperwork. Now here's another form you have to fill out. So it's not surprising that the adherence rate, if you will, for the surgeons is fairly low. Thus, the data stream that's coming out of those surgeries is quite limited. Then we ask them to go fill out an operative note, and maybe they do it a week or two later when they do their coding, and then somebody bothers them because they didn't fill out the coding forms correctly. This is really how it works, right? So even a very large system like this that does tens of thousands of spinal fusions every year across the US hasn't figured out how to capture even that simplest of information. What did you do in the surgery? That drives so many other outputs. And so they don't know what that should cost either. If I offer them a service, would it be $500 per surgery? In a surgery that costs $40,000 to $75,000, a two-level spinal fusion, depending on where you do it in North America. They don't even know the value of that thing. They know it's very hard to get clinicians to fill out that form. They know that they want that information. They don't know themselves how to monetize it if they could get perfect information.
So it's even a question of how do you actually implement this to collect the data to then be able to augment.
So back to my
the care.
question about intuitive. Is it a way to drive more value from existing customers and make the product a little more sticky? Because something we do in our business is once you introduce it, you can't charge for it incrementally. But there's no way in hell your customer base is going to turn that off once they have access to it. I think there's everything from that to here's a new thing. It costs $50,000 a month for every subscription. And it layers on top of the platform. We get to kind of explore those because we're at the tip of this business model, collecting that really valuable data.
Very interesting.
I see three hurdles when you have to deal with that. Number one, we've talked about, it's curation of the data. You have to have someone qualifies the data that you store so that you can actually use it. Complementary data that you would want. I'm getting an image, but I want the result of a biopsy, for example, to correlate that. And third is the data ownership or data privacy and data, so for all these three things, I think the key for us is a very strong partnership with our customers. And every time we sell a device, we really have to engage the customer that will become a partner for future value creation of our product. So it's, to me, involving customers is key.
Very clear. Michael, Hamid, any last thoughts on this topic?
Having the burden of the last knock-in. So, to me, as I touched on earlier, is like, I think as a community, as a whole, like from a pre-digital era in some way, transitioning towards that is a long way to go still. And how to connect all these stakeholders that essentially can be complementary, I think requires a fair degree of standardization. Otherwise, we will, I think, end up in a situation where big players will have some form of monopoly, where they have like access to that in a very ecosystem, access to data. And for startups, like in some way drive of innovation, figure out how to being able to inject into that and also derive value from there for it to have a chance as well to be viable. I think there's a lot on how as a community can be designed that the business models as well are very much like future-proofed, and I don't at this point like I think it's fair to say we're still trying to figure it out. So it's too early for us, of course, to have a public opinion on that. But it is very, very. I think it's a long way to go still to make sure we are ready for, I guess, AI data-driven business models, because we should all have data-driven business models even in, I guess, more traditional contexts. But yeah.
Very clear. So if I summarize, it sounds like you need to have identified a clear first utility, something where this model will apply an additional healthcare benefit, healthcare outcome or something. The second is that you can eventually then start thinking about creating this flywheel, this data flywheel on the one hand, but of course insight generation on the other, and then seeing how you move from a first pillar into a second one, which eventually can even lead to development of new products or automation or at least added functionalities that you could then possibly dream of. But to your point, Gabe, it's sometimes the systems are just not built for that data generation. So you need to find a way of, I guess, incentivizing that to take place to then be able to ultimately monetize on it. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, and that may lead to a V2 of that product where the paywall, maybe you're giving it away first because there's such a pain point to acquire this information in a form that is standardized and templatized. Not the most exciting and sexy product on the front end, but if it gets you access to a full ecosystem of data, a life cycle of every procedure, well, that you have to believe you can monetize because everybody wants access to that information. And you get the honor or the opportunity to go attempt to monetize it with each of the players who benefits from it. So in that case, it's really worthwhile to build that front-end product that sits on the platform, even if it's not an incremental lift in revenue day one, but you're in the game and you have an opportunity to monetize it.
So almost the Google search function being totally free, but then of course all the marketing insight and the revenues you can potentially build on top of that. That's where we're headed.
Historically wonderful business model.
Excellent. Gentlemen, I think that's the end of this session, but thank you very much for taking part.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.